Have you ever had comfort, laughter, and even a quiet sense that life is not terrible, yet a hollow ache still appeared afterward as if something essential was missing? Have you ever noticed that the harder you chase pleasure to feel safe, the more anxious the mind becomes, as if joy itself turns into a fragile thing you must protect? Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are going to talk about a misunderstanding that quietly drains modern life. People hear the phrase "leave suffering and find joy," and they imagine a clean escape. They imagine running away from pain, hiding from responsibility, or numbing themselves until nothing touches them. But real practice does not erase human life. It changes the way the mind grips human life. And that difference is where karma turns, where destiny becomes lighter, where compassion becomes real, and where awakening stops being a dream and becomes a daily direction. Here is the central paradox. Many people already have happiness. Not perfect happiness, but real moments of warmth. A meal that tastes good. A friend who answers. A sunny afternoon. A safe bed. A joke that makes the chest loosen. Yet they still feel thirsty. So they assume they need more happiness, more stimulation, more travel, more recognition, more control, more proof that life is safe. But the thirst continues. Why? Because the thirst is not caused by lack of pleasant moments. The thirst is caused by clinging. Clinging turns a pleasant moment into a demand, and demand turns joy into anxiety. In Buddhism, there is an old teaching that suffering has layers. There is ordinary pain, the pain of the body and the world. And then there is the extra suffering created by the mind. The mind adds a second arrow. The first arrow is life. The second arrow is the mind shouting that life should not be like life. The first arrow is a changing world. The second arrow is the mind demanding permanence from impermanence. The first arrow is a feeling. The second arrow is the mind turning that feeling into identity, blame, story, and war. So when we say leave suffering and find joy, we are not saying leave every discomfort. We are saying leave the second arrow. Leave the habit of clinging. Leave the habit of hatred. Leave the habit of ignorance, which is not stupidity, but the blindness that cannot see cause and effect inside the heart. When those habits weaken, you do not become numb. You become free. You still feel pain, but you do not multiply it the same way. You still feel joy, but you do not choke it by gripping it. That is the difference between leaky joy and steady joy. Let me tell you a story about someone named Claire. Claire was the kind of person most people would call fine. Not tragic, not desperate. Fine. She had friends. She had a job. She had hobbies. She had small pleasures. She could afford coffee. She could take a weekend trip now and then. She could laugh. She could post photos that looked like happiness. But inside, she carried a strange contradiction. The more she tried to be happy, the more she felt a subtle fear underneath happiness. The fear was not always loud. Sometimes it was just a shadow, a sense that joy could be stolen at any moment. If she had a great evening with friends, the next morning she would feel a drop, like the body fell back to earth. She would say to herself, "Why do I feel empty? Nothing is wrong." If she received praise at work, she would feel warmth for a few minutes. Then attention would rise. Now I must keep proving myself. Now I must not fail. Now I must protect this image. If she fell in love, the joy was intense, almost like electricity. But the intensity came with a hidden cost. She began watching the other person constantly. Did they reply fast enough? Did their tone change? Are they drifting? The mind began to patrol the relationship like a guard with no sleep. Claire did not understand what was happening. She thought she had an anxiety problem. She thought she was broken. She thought she could not enjoy life the way others did. But the deeper truth was simpler and more universal. Claire was confusing intensity with joy, and she was confusing control with safety. Intensity is not joy. Intensity is a wave. Waves rise and fall. If you build your identity on the wave, you will panic when the wave changes. Joy that depends on the wave is leaky joy. It leaks because it is built on conditions that always move. Control is not safety. Control is a temporary illusion. It can reduce risk in some practical situations, but when it becomes a mental addiction, it makes the heart rigid. A rigid heart cannot rest. A rigid heart cannot receive. A rigid heart turns love into management. A rigid heart turns joy into guarding. That is not freedom. So Claire began to chase what she called leaving suffering. She tried to leave discomfort at all costs. When sadness appeared, she distracted herself. When loneliness appeared, she booked plans quickly. When uncertainty appeared, she searched the internet for answers. When fear appeared, she attempted to fix the future before it arrived. She did not realize she was leaving the wrong suffering. She was trying to leave the suffering of feeling. But the suffering of feeling is not the true suffering. Feeling is just weather. The true suffering was her refusal to feel. The true suffering was her habit of clinging, resisting, and escaping. This is like trying to remove waves from the ocean. You can exhaust yourself forever and still fail. The wiser path is learning to surf. The wiser path is learning to stay balanced. The wiser path is learning equanimity, not as coldness, but as stability inside changing weather. One evening, Claire attended a meditation session at a small community space. She did not go because she was enlightened. She went because she was tired. The tiredness was not only physical. It was the tiredness of chasing joy like a job. After the session, she stayed behind and spoke to the mentor, an older woman with calm eyes. Claire expected the mentor to give her techniques to feel good. Instead, the mentor asked her a question. When you say you want joy, what do you mean by joy? Claire answered without thinking, I mean, I want the pain to stop. The mentor nodded gently. Then she said something that pierced Claire in a way that was both painful and relieving. Then you are not seeking joy. You are seeking anesthesia. Claire felt embarrassed, but she also felt seen. The mentor continued, real joy is not anesthesia. Real joy is a mind that can be present without collapsing. A mind that can feel pain without turning it into hatred. A mind that can feel pleasure without turning it into fear. A mind that can love without gripping. That mind is trained. It is not bought. It is cultivated. Claire asked, how do I cultivate it? The mentor said, you start by observing the exact moment you cling. Not judging, not attacking, observing. Then, the mentor offered a practice that sounded too small, almost insulting to the part of Claire that wanted dramatic solutions. Each time a pleasant feeling appears, notice the urge to hold it. Each time an unpleasant feeling appears, notice the urge to push it away. Then breathe and soften. Do not force the feeling to stay or to leave. Just see the movement of the mind. See clinging. See aversion. See ignorance. And then return. Return to the breath. Return to the body. Return to the present. Claire thought, that cannot be enough. But the mentor said, this is how the mind changes. You do not change the mind by winning an argument with it. You change the mind by starving the old habit and feeding the new habit, one moment at a time. That night, Claire went home and tried it. She sat on her bed and closed her eyes. Within seconds, the mind produced noise, lists, worries, memories. Her body felt restless. She wanted to reach for her phone. She noticed the urge to escape. She labeled it quietly, escaping. Then she breathed. The urge did not disappear, but something else appeared. A gap, a small space where she did not obey the urge immediately. In that space, she felt a sadness she had been running from. The sadness was not dramatic. It was simple. A longing, a tiredness, a wish to be held by life without constantly fighting. Claire wanted to run again, but she remembered the instruction. Softening does not mean collapsing. Softening means allowing the feeling without turning it into a story. So she breathed and stayed. The sadness rose, peaked, and softened slightly. Not because she forced it, but because feelings change when you stop feeding them with resistance. This was the beginning of Claire learning to leave the right suffering. She was leaving the suffering of resistance. She was leaving the suffering of clinging. She was leaving the suffering of turning feelings into identity. Now let us slow down and make this practical, because if we keep it abstract, the mind will turn it into a nice idea and then go back to its old habits. There are several kinds of suffering that people mistakenly try to leave. One is discomfort. They treat discomfort like an enemy. They treat boredom, loneliness, sadness, and uncertainty like disasters. So they chase stimulation, attention, and control. But the chasing creates more suffering because it trains the mind to panic whenever life is quiet. Another is vulnerability. They treat vulnerability like danger, so they try to become untouchable. They try to become perfect. They try to become admired. They try to become so useful that nobody can abandon them. This creates a life that looks successful but feels tense. Another is impermanence. They treat change like betrayal, so they cling to people, cling to roles, cling to identity, cling to youth, cling to certainty. But clinging to what changes is like gripping smoke. The tighter you grip, the less you have, and the more you suffer. Leaving the right suffering means leaving the habit of fighting reality. It does not mean approving harm. It does not mean becoming passive. It means responding to reality with wisdom instead of arguing with it inside your head for hours. And finding the right joy means discovering joy that is not dependent on gripping. This is where the middle way becomes crucial. The middle way is not a bland compromise. The middle way is skill. It is balanced effort. It is strong compassion. It is the ability to act without obsession and to surrender without collapsing. Claire started practicing this middle way in small daily moments. When she ate something delicious, she noticed the mind saying, "I need more." She smiled and took a breath. She tasted slowly. She allowed enjoyment without turning enjoyment into craving. When she received praise, she noticed the mind saying, "I must keep this image." She breathed and remembered impermanence. Praise changes. Blame changes. She practiced steadiness. She thanked the person and returned to her work without feeding obsession. When she felt lonely, she noticed the mind saying, "I must fix this now." She breathed and allowed loneliness to exist like weather. Sometimes she reached out to a friend, not from desperation, but from honest connection. Sometimes she stayed alone, not as punishment, but as practice. This is an important difference. The same action can be clinging or wisdom depending on intention. Reaching out can be beautiful connection or desperate grasping. Being alone can be mindful solitude or bitter isolation. The mind decides. As weeks passed, Claire began to see that she had been chasing the wrong kind of joy. She had been chasing joy that felt like relief from fear. But relief from fear is not steady joy. It is temporary calm, and it often creates dependence. Steady joy is different. Steady joy is the quiet well-being that comes from integrity, compassion, and presence. It is the joy of a mind that is not constantly at war. It is the joy of clean karma, of right speech, of not harming yourself with endless inner criticism. Claire discovered steady joy in places she used to ignore. She discovered it while washing dishes, when she chose to be present rather than rushing through life. She discovered it while walking, feeling the ground, noticing the sky, noticing that life is even when the mind is not chasing a reward. She discovered it during a difficult conversation, when she spoke to Ruth without poison and felt the strength of integrity. She discovered it when she apologized without defending herself and felt the heart become lighter. These are not dramatic pleasures. They are quiet joys. But quiet joys do not leak as much because they are not built on gripping. Now, I want to tell you another story that will help you see how easily we confuse the wrong suffering in the wrong joy. There was a man I will call Jonah. Jonah believed he was chasing happiness, but what he was truly chasing was distraction from an old wound. The wound was the feeling of not being enough. Jonah grew up believing love had to be earned through performance. So as an adult, he performed constantly. He worked hard. He collected achievements. He tried to be impressive. When he felt praise, he felt joy. When he did not feel praise, he felt pain. So he thought, I must seek more praise. I must seek more success. That is leaving suffering. That is finding joy. But every achievement only increased his fear, because now he had something to lose. This is the tragedy of leaky joy. It makes you work harder while feeling less free. One day Jonah had a breakdown after a big win. He achieved something he had dreamed about, and that night he could not sleep. He felt restless, anxious, and strangely empty. He stared at the ceiling and realized he was living inside a hunger that had no end. He spoke to a friend who practiced meditation. The friend did not judge him. The friend asked one question: what if your suffering is not the lack of success, but the need for success to prove you are worthy? That question hit Jonah like a bell. Jonah began practicing in a simple way. He sat quietly and watched the mind. He saw the craving for validation. He saw how it rose like thirst. He saw how he obeyed it automatically. Then he experimented. When the craving arose, he did not immediately feed it. He breathed. He softened. He said quietly, I see you, craving. You can be here, but you will not doctor me today. It felt uncomfortable at first, because the ego hates being told no. But over time, Jonah began to feel a different kind of joy. The joy of not needing applause to breathe. The joy of doing good work for its own sake. The joy of being ordinary without feeling ashamed. This is liberation. Now, you might be thinking, this sounds like giving up ambition. It is not giving up ambition. It is removing poison from ambition. There is a big difference between aspiration and craving. Aspiration is clean. Aspiration says, I want to grow. I want to serve. I want to cultivate wisdom. I want to reduce suffering. Craving is sticky. Craving says, I need this to be okay. I need this to be safe. I need this to prove I exist. When you remove craving, aspiration becomes lighter and more powerful because it is not fueled by fear. This is why the path is not about becoming passive. It is about becoming clean. Now let us talk about the phrase, you might be leaving the wrong suffering and chasing the wrong joy in the most direct way. Leaving the wrong suffering means you are trying to eliminate any uncomfortable feeling. And that makes you fragile. If you cannot tolerate boredom, you become addicted to stimulation. If you cannot tolerate loneliness, you become addicted to attention. If you cannot tolerate uncertainty, you become addicted to control. If you cannot tolerate shame, you become addicted to performance. Each addiction creates new suffering. So you think you are leaving suffering, but you are actually building a new cage. Chasing the wrong joy means you chase pleasures that increase clinging, because those pleasures feel like relief, but they train dependence. You chase the next purchase, the next compliment, the next romantic high, the next travel photo, the next win, the next proof that you matter. But because these are impermanent, the mind stays anxious. So you think you are finding joy, but you are actually finding new fear. Finding the right joy means you cultivate a joy that reduces clinging, a joy that comes from presence, a joy that comes from compassion, a joy that comes from integrity, a joy that comes from understanding impermanence and not fighting it, a joy that comes from service, because service dissolves the ego that keeps screaming for more. Now, I want to bring the teaching into daily life with a long, story-based walkthrough, because this is how it becomes real. Imagine you wake up in the morning. The first moment is small but decisive. You reach for your phone. The mind wants stimulation. The mind wants to check messages. The mind wants to chase certainty. The mind wants to fill the silence. This is where leaving the wrong suffering begins. You are trying to leave the discomfort of silence by grabbing noise. What would leaving the right suffering look like? It would look like pausing for one breath before touching the phone, feeling the body, feeling the breath, not forcing calm, just noticing. In that one breath, you begin training non-attachment. You begin training the ability to stay with the present without immediately escaping. This is not moral perfection. This is practice. Then imagine your day begins. A small problem appears. I delay. A message that feels rude. A plan that changes. A bill. A traffic jam. The first arrow is the event. The second arrow is the inner war. The second arrow says, this should not happen. I cannot handle this. This always happens to me. People are terrible. Life is unfair. I need this to be smooth. Leaving suffering means removing the second arrow. It means feeling the event, then returning to skill. What is skill here? Skill might be one breath. Skill might be right speech. Skill might be patience. Skill might be compassionate boundaries. Skill might be taking the next wise step without poisoning the mind. And here is the key point. When you remove the second arrow, the day becomes lighter, even if the problems remain. This is why some people seem peaceful in storms. They are not magical. They simply stopped adding the second arrow. Now let us talk about joy. The wrong joy is the joy that requires conditions to stay perfect. The wrong joy is the joy that collapses the moment someone disagrees with you. The wrong joy is the joy that disappears when your phone is silent. The wrong joy is the joy that depends on being seen as special. This joy is not evil. It is simply unstable. The right joy is the joy that can exist even when conditions change. It is the joy of a mind that can breathe in uncertainty. It is the joy of a heart that can love without gripping. It is the joy of a person who keeps promises and therefore trusts themselves. Self-trust is a form of joy. It is quiet, but it is powerful. Now I want to show you how this becomes a path of awakening. Not just self-help, Awakening is not a dramatic spiritual event you chase. Awakening is the repeated moment when you see the mind clearly and choose not to be possessed. You see craving and you do not obey it. You see anger and you do not feed it. You see shame and you do not drown in it. You see fear and you do not let it become cruelty. This seeing is awakening. And each time you do it, karma changes. Because karma is not only big actions. Karma is the mind state you feed repeatedly. A greedy mind state creates greedy speech, greedy choices, greedy relationships. An angry mind state creates harsh speech, conflict, isolation. An ignorant mind state creates repetitive suffering because it cannot see the pattern. When you practice mindfulness, you begin to see these mind states early, before they become actions. That is why mindfulness is power. Now we need to talk about compassion, because without compassion, practice becomes another ego project. Many people chase joy in a selfish way. They want happiness for themselves as a shield. They want to be safe, admired, untouchable. But the path is not only for you. The path is for reducing suffering for beings. When you cultivate compassion, something surprising happens. The heart becomes less hungry. Why? Because the ego is a hungry ghost. It always wants more. Compassion feeds a different part of you. It feeds meaning. It feeds connection. It feeds the bodhisattva direction, the direction of becoming someone who reduces harm. Meaning stabilizes joy. A life without meaning may have pleasures, but it still feels empty. A life with meaning can face hardship without collapsing. So compassion is not decoration. Compassion is structural. It changes your inner architecture. Claire learned this when she began volunteering one evening a week. At first she did it because she thought it would be good for her mental health. Then she noticed something deeper. When she helped others, her mind stopped obsessing about her own feelings. Not in a repressive way, in a freeing way. Her own problems did not disappear, but they shrank to their proper size. She stopped treating every mood as a crisis. She stopped treating every discomfort as proof she was broken. She began seeing her suffering as one wave in a larger ocean. That perspective is wisdom, and wisdom brings a calmer joy. Now I want to address something that trips up many sincere people. Some people hear about non-attachment and think it means not caring. That is a misunderstanding. Non-attachment means caring without gripping. It means loving without controlling. It means enjoying without demanding that enjoyment stay forever. It means committing without needing guarantees. It means practicing without turning awakening into a trophy. A person can be deeply committed and still non-attached. They act with full heart, but they do not cling to outcomes. This is the middle way. It is not cold. It is courageous. Claire practiced non-attachment in relationships. When she felt the urge to check messages repeatedly, she noticed the urge and breathed. When she felt the urge to interpret silence as rejection, she noticed the story and returned to the present. When she felt fear of abandonment, she placed a hand on her chest and offered loving kindness to her own fear, not indulgence. Compassion, she said quietly. Fear, I see you. You can be here. I will not abandon you. And I will not let you drive my actions. This practice changed her relationships, because when you stop acting from fear, you stop creating the very outcome you fear. Fear-based behavior often pushes people away. Control pushes people away. Constant reassurance seeking pushes people away. But calm honesty draws people closer. This is karma again. Now let me tell you another long story inside the main story, because this is where many viewers will feel the deepest resonance. There was a woman I will call Mila. Mila believed she had to leave suffering by leaving her life. She thought, if I could just quit my job, move somewhere quiet, and live a simpler life, then I would finally be peaceful. She tried it. She saved money. She moved. She reduced her responsibilities. For the first month, she felt relief. Then the same mind returned. The mind started complaining about the new town. The mind started worrying about money. The mind started comparing her life to others online. The mind started fearing she made the wrong choice. Mila realized something painful. She did not escape suffering. She just changed the scenery. So she started practicing meditation seriously. At first, meditation made her feel worse because silence revealed what distraction had hidden. It revealed the inner critic. It revealed the old grief. It revealed the fear of being ordinary. Mila wanted to quit, but she found a teacher who said something that saved her. Meditation does not create your darkness. It reveals your darkness, and what is revealed can be purified. That sentence helped Mila stay. She learned that leaving suffering is not leaving the external world. It is leaving the habit of running. Running can look like moving, shopping, scrolling, dating, working, overthinking, blaming, chasing. Running is the mind refusing to meet itself. So Mila stopped running in small ways. She stayed with boredom for 2 minutes. She stayed with loneliness for 2 minutes. She stayed with sadness for 2 minutes. She stayed with uncertainty for 2 minutes. Each time she stayed, she discovered something. Feelings are waves. They rise and fall. They only become unbearable when you resist them, shame them, or turn them into identity. So Mila began leaving suffering by leaving resistance. And then something surprising happened. She began finding joy in ordinary life, not the joy of excitement, the joy of quiet presence. She said one day, "I used to think joy was something I had to chase. Now it feels like something that appears when I stop chasing." That is the teaching in one sentence. Joy appears when clinging relaxes. Now, if you are listening and thinking, "This sounds beautiful, but my suffering is real. My pain is heavy. My circumstances are hard." Yes, circumstances matter. This teaching is not telling you to deny reality. It is telling you to stop adding unnecessary suffering on top of real pain. It is telling you to stop making your pain into a story of self-hatred. It is telling you to stop making your hardship into a reason to become cruel. It is telling you to cultivate wisdom and compassion in the middle of your life, not as a fantasy escape. Because the deepest joy is not the absence of difficulty. The deepest joy is the presence of freedom. Freedom means you can breathe even when life is imperfect. Freedom means you can love even when you cannot control. Freedom means you can act ethically even when you are afraid. Freedom means you can be patient with impermanence. This is why ancient teachings place so much emphasis on practice. Not because you need to be special, because you need training. Now I want to bring in the idea of meritant, cause and effect in a way that connects to joy. Many people think joy is a mood, but there is also joy that comes from virtue. Not virtue as moral performance, virtue as clean cause. When you speak with right speech, you create less conflict. Less conflict creates more peace. When you keep promises, you create self-trust. Self-trust creates calm. When you live with integrity, you reduce inner shame. Reduced shame creates warmth. When you act with compassion, you reduce inner poison. Reduced poison creates spaciousness. This spaciousness is joy. So joy is not only something that happens to you. Joy can be something you cultivate by planting clean causes. This is how karma supports joy. Now, let me tell you how Claire began to notice the difference between leaky joy and steady joy in a very specific moment. She was at a small gathering. People were talking, laughing, sharing stories. In the past, Claire would have been scanning the room unconsciously, asking, "Do they like me? Am I included? Am I impressive? Am I safe?" That scanning is suffering. It is subtle, but it is suffering. This time, she noticed the scanning. She took one breath and returned to presence. She listened to the person in front of her fully. She smiled naturally. She did not perform. And suddenly she felt joy. Not because someone praised her, because she was present. Presence is joy. The mind that is not split is joyful. The mind that is not chasing is joyful. The heart that is not defending is joyful. This joy is steady. It can exist in a room, even if nobody is paying special attention to you. That is freedom. Now, a question arises. If this is true, why do we still chase the wrong joy? Because the nervous system has habits. Because society trains us to chase. Because capitalism trains craving. Because trauma trains control. Because fear trains avoidance. So the path is not a one-time insight. It is daily cultivation. Cultivation is the practice of returning. Return to the breath. Return to the body. Return to compassion. Return to right speech. Return to patience. Return to the middle way. Return again and again. And each return changes karma. Now, I want to share a deeper layer that many people miss. Some people have happiness, but still suffer because their happiness is mixed with guilt. They feel guilty for being okay when others are not. They feel guilty for resting. They feel guilty for enjoying. They feel guilty for being ordinary. This guilt is another form of clinging. It clings to an image of how you should be. It clings to self-punishment as proof you care. But guilt is not compassion. Compassion is wiser. Compassion says, I can allow joy without denying others pain. I can allow happiness and use that stability to serve. This is why the Bodhisattva direction is powerful. It transforms joy from selfish relief into meaningful energy. When joy becomes meaningful energy, it becomes steadier. Now, I will tell you a story about a man named Theo. Theo grew up believing that joy was dangerous. When he was joyful as a child, something would go wrong, so he learned to expect punishment after pleasure. As an adult, whenever he felt happy, anxiety rose. He thought the solution was to avoid joy. He became serious. He became hardworking. He became responsible. People praised him for being stable, but inside he felt dry. Then he met someone who taught him a simple truth. The problem is not joy. The problem is fear attached to joy. So Theo practiced separating the two. When a good moment happened, he noticed the fear. He did not obey it. He breathed and allowed the moment to be good. He said quietly, "This moment is impermanent, and that is okay. I do not need to punish myself for enjoying life." This practice was difficult, but over time, his nervous system learned a new pattern. Joy does not have to be paid for with anxiety. This is healing, and healing is part of leaving suffering. Leaving suffering includes healing the patterns that keep producing fear. Now, you might ask, how do I know if I am leaving the wrong suffering or the right suffering? Here is a simple test you can feel. If your method makes you more numb, more avoidant, more dependent, more controlling, and more fearful of discomfort, you are probably leaving the wrong suffering. If your method makes you more present, more compassionate, more stable, more honest, and more able to tolerate impermanence, you are probably leaving the right suffering. Leaving the right suffering does not always feel pleasant at first, because you will feel what you used to avoid. You will feel boredom, grief, fear, loneliness. But those feelings are not your enemy. Your enemy is the habit of turning them into a prison. When you can feel them without being possessed, you are free. Now, I want to take you through a long day in the life of a person practicing this, because it will help you see how it is not mystical. Imagine you wake up and feel a small heaviness. Old pattern says, I need stimulation. New practice says, one breath, you breathe, the heaviness remains, but it is no longer an emergency. You get up, you eat, thought appears, my life should be different. You notice it, you label it, demanding. You return to the taste of the food. That is leaving suffering. Later, you receive a message that triggers you. Old pattern says, react fast. New practice says, pause. You breathe. You notice anger rising. You label it, anger. You decide to respond with clean speech. You set a boundary without poison. That is leaving suffering. Later, something good happens. A friend compliments you. Old pattern says, hold this forever. I need more. New practice says, receive it with gratitude and let it pass. You smile. You say thank you. You do not build identity on it. That is finding joy. Later, you feel lonely in the evening. Old pattern says, scroll, chase, avoid. New practice says, sit for 3 minutes. You breathe. You feel the loneliness. You do not die. You do not become it. You are just feeling it. Then you choose something wholesome. A walk, a call, a simple meal, a journal, or quiet rest. That is leaving suffering. And in the middle of that quiet, a gentle joy appears. Not because you earned it, not because you forced it, because you stopped blocking it. This is the path. Now, I want to connect this to destiny, because many people want to know how inner practice changes outer life. When you remove the second arrow, you create less conflict. When you create less conflict, relationships improve. When relationships improve, opportunities expand. When opportunities expand, your external life becomes smoother. Not perfect, smoother. When your life becomes smoother, you have more energy for practice. When you have more energy, you can serve others. When you serve others, meaning grows. When meaning grows, joy becomes steady. This is a virtuous cycle. It begins with one breath. Now let us talk about the 3 poisons in a way that connects directly to the phrase leaving suffering and finding joy. Greed is not only money. It is the mind that always wants more sensation, more praise, more control. Greed creates suffering because it cannot rest. Aversion is not only anger. It is the mind that rejects reality, that says no to life, that hardens. Aversion creates suffering because it creates war. Ignorance is not insult. It is the mind that cannot see the pattern, that believes feelings are commands, that believes thoughts are facts, that believes the self is a fixed story. Ignorance creates suffering because it repeats the same mistakes. Leaving suffering means reducing these poisons. Finding joy means finding the natural well-being that appears when poison decreases. This is not a moral threat. It is practical. A greedy mind is restless. A restless mind cannot enjoy what it has. An averse mind is harsh. A harsh mind cannot rest in love. An ignorant mind repeats suffering. A repeating mind cannot settle. So wisdom and compassion are medicine. Now, I want to speak directly to the person who feels they already have happiness, but still cannot relax. You are not crazy. This is common. It often means your mind does not trust impermanence. It means you keep scanning for loss. It means you keep preparing for disappointment. It means you are living in the future, so your present happiness cannot land. The solution is not chasing more happiness. The solution is training presence, so happiness can actually be felt without being stolen by fear. This is why mindfulness is so powerful. Mindfulness is the act of coming home, and coming home is joy. Now, I will end by bringing you back to the title question. You already have happiness, so why seek to leave suffering and find joy? Because happiness without wisdom becomes fear. Because happiness without non-attachment becomes clinging. Because happiness without compassion becomes emptiness. Because happiness without practice becomes leaky joy. So you seek to leave suffering not by leaving life, but by leaving the second arrow. You seek to find joy not by chasing intensity, but by cultivating steadiness. You cultivate steadiness through mindfulness, right speech, integrity, compassion, and the middle way. That is the path. And the beautiful part is that you do not need to wait for a perfect life to begin. You can begin in the next breath. If something in this talk felt like it was describing your own experience, share your story in the comments in your own words. Tell me where you notice clinging, where you notice resistance, and what kind of joy you want to cultivate. Subscribe to the channel if you want more long-form teachings like this. And support the work by liking and commenting so these teachings reach the people who need them. At the end of the day, we all need something that brings us back to ourselves. Something that reminds us to slow down, breathe, and stay centered. Simple bracelet can do exactly that. Every bead you touch brings your mind back to calm, back to clarity, back to the present moment. If one of the bracelets you just saw resonates with you, you can find the purchase link in the video description and explore more beautiful styles in our channel store. Let the one meant for you find its way to your wrist.